What's going on, YouTube? Welcome back to Hockey Stick Talk Nation on this special Saturday night live with my guest, David from Locked On Leafs. So, what's going on, David? Thanks for coming.
It's great. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate the invitation. It's always nice to get a chance to talk with someone who I mean, it's the first time I ever spoke with you. I appreciate you reaching out to me. So it's always great to have another setting to do some hockey talk.
Definitely. We got a lot of Leafs fans in here and a couple Habs fans in here also. So it's going to be a fun little chat night tonight. I have your Locked On Leafs description or link in the chat, so feel free to go over and sub them up and give them a like too. Also, helps them grow. So go do that for me. That'd be much appreciated. And we'll just give a quick little shout out to everybody who's in the chat right now. We got Dewey coming in. We have Matthew. We have Diggit. We have Barry. Thank you guys all for coming in tonight. Appreciate it. We have Pops here too, Robert Springs. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. So as we'll do, we'll dive right in here, and we'll give a quick shout out to our sponsor every week, which is Tsunami Hockeycards. If you guys are looking for singles or anything like that for your collection, go check them out on eBay and use the code DMHockey for 25% off your first purchase. And he's also on Whatnot now too, so go check him out. And we'll dive right in here. So we're going to dive right in with our first topic here, David, and maybe you can enlighten us on some of these players as well. This is the top 5 Leaf prospects, and at first we have probably one of the great showings for Team Canada this year, and that's Easton Cowan. What can you tell us a little bit about Easton Cowan?
Yeah, I still remember the day the Leafs drafted Easton Cowan. You know, the Leafs had gotten a late first round pick from the Capitals when they traded Sandin to the Capitals, and so as kind of been the Leafs flavor, they've never been a team that's drafted for size a lot throughout the years, especially in like the Kyle Dubas era. So when they selected Easton Cowan, the first thing every single person did, what's his size, what's his weight? And once they saw he wasn't a big player, they're like, this is a prototypical Leafs pick, right? And a lot of people were surprised with this pick because many didn't see him technically as a first rounder. So a lot of people thought maybe a bit of a reach for the Leafs. Well, what quickly many realized is this is not a player who was a reach by any stretch of the imagination, because ever since the Leafs took him, he has been one of the stars in the OHL for the London Knights. Probably one of their top forwards ever since he got drafted. It's interesting because as soon as you become a Leafs prospect, all the eyes go right on you, right? And so he's been on this incredible run the last few years. He's on a point streak that's reaching almost 60 games. I actually hadn't even seen if that streak had continued. Sometimes it just gets lost in weeks because they play quite a bit during during the week, and then it almost like, I forgot he was playing tonight. But he's a player right now that he's in a perfect development position right now because he's playing for the London Knights, who are always competitive. You know, they went on a really good run this year or last year in the OHL playoffs. He was a star for them in those playoffs. They went on to the Memorial Cup. Unfortunately, the Memorial Cup final didn't go their way, but Cowan was a pretty good player for them. Where he hasn't exactly thrived, though, is in the juniors, the World Juniors. He didn't do bad for Team Canada. The problem was this Team Canada squad that they picked was flawed in a lot of ways. Just wasn't built the right way. And I felt like there was too much pressure on just him to try to elevate a group that he shouldn't have had to elevate. There should have been other players around him that could have been better. But what I like about Cowan is he's small but doesn't play small. He's got a good nose on the power play. He's a good shot, likes to distribute. He works his butt off. And that's, I think, a calling card that the Leafs really liked. I think this is going to be like one of those picks in a few years that you look at if they do this properly, he could develop really nicely into what the Leafs are trying to do. And the other guys you have here, Fraser Minton, he's a player, again, when he was selected, people didn't view him as highly because they thought at most a third line center in the NHL if his development went right. But this is a guy who a lot of players think is already a pro with the way he approaches, his maturity, the way his game is, right? He just plays the right way. And he got a chance to open up the year. Actually, no, not open up the year because he was hurt. But he got a chance to play a bit this year, and he's been up and down. You're seeing a bit of the transition to the pros is a little bit tougher for Mindy because as a center, you're going up against guys who are got so much experience at the NHL level that it's kind of tough. That's why the Leafs have really tried to prioritize his development in the AHL. I think if they do this development right, he can be a guy that can contribute in their middle six, preferably as a third line center, which sometimes people think, that's it. Those guys are important. This is another guy that, when it comes to playoff time, the Leafs might have to look at someone like him if they can't find that center, or if they do find that center, someone that will then allow Minton to develop into that role eventually one day. I think they got to be very careful not to ask for too much out of Minton right now. He's still a little raw as a prospect. The next one here, Topi Niemelä, he's a very interesting one because I've been waiting for this player. He's still in the Marlies. They drafted him and Hirvonen way back pre-pandemic. We're talking back in 2020. So it was like during that COVID draft. So obviously with the pandemic and things, that kind of impacted the development of a lot of these players. So it took them a little bit longer to not only come to North America because it got delayed a little bit. Usually these guys want to play a bit more for the in Finland, which is what happened here. Eventually he did make his way to the AHL. And last year there were a lot of positives from Topi Niemelä offensively. I think they're still waiting for him as a defenseman to get his game a little more pro ready as a defenseman. Not the smallest player, but not the biggest guy either. He's kind of a bit of a tweener in that regard, but he's someone that I'm hoping eventually one day we might see him get potentially a look here at the NHL. He's not on the track yet to be called up. I think they really, really do want to take a patient approach to him. He's 22 years old. Defensemen always take longer, especially those who come from Europe. Those guys got to get used to playing the North American style. So I think that's what's going on with Topi Niemelä. Dennis Hildeby, this is probably the one who's seen the most. He's the one that's seen probably the most action out of all of them in the NHL. He's right now the backup for the Leafs because they got Stolarz, who's injured. When he came to North America, everyone you look up at this hulking monster of a goalie. Reminded a lot of people about Jonas Gustafsson. If call back to a lot of Leafs fans who remember the monster when he came from Sweden to North America. It was like that big signing. Didn't really pan out too well for him in the NHL. And I think with Hildeby, they see good things, the size, the athleticism he has. He's still working on, I think, being ready to play against NHL players. His AHL numbers have been pretty good. He did tail off a bit at the end of the year, but that's because he's not used to the workload that goalies now in the AHL get. In Sweden and in the Swedish Hockey League, they don't get as many games they do here in North America. So that's just part of the development for him. But so far, he's worked himself into that. If the Leafs need a goalie, they'll call him up. He's had some good moments. He's had some. Again, we're seeing a goalie who's still developing. I like where their goaltending depth is as an organization. It was never a good thing in the past because they didn't really have a lot of goalies that they had drafted and developed. I feel a lot better of how they're managing that department. They've revamped that whole department. So I think he's a part of this. Him, Joseph Woll, Artur Tinyamov. There's some really good goalies that the Leafs have in their system that they really hope that can alleviate the need to go outside and find a goaltender, because that's always where you get into trouble having to trade or sign a goalie, because not everyone's proven. You want to go with the guy that's been in your system. And finally, Ben Danford, the newest addition to the system. He was their first round pick in this past year's draft, And you know what? He's a guy that unfortunately we didn't get to see a lot of during training camp because he got hurt. He got a concussion during even just before the prospect turn. So we didn't really get to see a lot of him. And this is another project. I call this one a project because, 18, he's a defenseman. You're going to see him play a few more years in the OHL, develop a bit more of his game before he comes and becomes, even going to the AHL. But, he's got some good tools. I think there's more to his offensive game than I think we've realized. It's just going to take time for him to develop. He's not small. He's about 6'2", so he's not small, but he's not overly big too. I think he realized in seeing some of his clips, he realizes he's got to get himself a bit bigger if he wants to go and become, a pro at the NHL level. It's one of those things where this was a pick that was going to be something down the road, or, one day if the Leafs need to make a move, if a team wants to trade for a player for down the road, this is someone that the Leafs would potentially offer. But I think they're going to hopefully be patient with this one. A right shot defenseman, when you draft one so early in the first round, or 31st overall, if you draft them in the first round, you got to be patient with them and really give them a chance this season.
Awesome. Thanks for letting us know about each one of these players. It's good to hear a little bit about each one. Get to know them kind of a little bit more and see where they're at in terms of development right now.
Yeah, it takes time for these guys. And again, the Leafs don't have the luxury again of having high picks like a lot of some teams maybe that are not in the competitive window that they're in. So the Leafs they kind of have to find those diamonds in the rough a little bit. I think Easton Cowan is the perfect example of one of those. If you're taking the right approach, he could be a real good bang for your buck with the way that they picked Easton Cowan there.
We're going to move right on here to our hockey news. So Ovechkin reached 20 goals for the 20th season and has him in second player in history, putting him up with Gordie Howe.
It's unbelievable. I mean, can you remember when Ovechkin first made it to the NHL? And everyone was complaining a lot about him being a showboat player. I think there was the one year where he scored 50 and he was put, flaming out the stick was hot, right? Yeah. He was a fun player when he was first in the league. I still think he's a fun player. He plays with so much passion. I know there's people that are still going to be, there's like that old Sid versus OV rivalry, right? Those were like peak NHL playoffs when those two went head to head in the playoffs. But what he's doing right now with this goal record, this 20-20 is just ridiculous. But just him on this chase for Gretzky, I think has really given hockey something to really rally behind in a lot of ways. Because look, there are Canadian hockey fans who probably don't want to see Gretzky lose that record, but there's some of us who are like, you know what, Gretzky's got quite a few records that will never be broken. It'd be nice to see somebody make their way up, because we haven't had this in such a long time. Anybody go up the ranks like this. I remember maybe when Brodeur became the all-time NHL wins, goalie wins, right? That was the closest I saw to any player set a new milestone, set a new top right record for the others behind them to try to chase. And I think that's the excitement. You're kind of passing the baton a little bit, and you're hoping maybe somebody else challenges Ovechkin down the road.
Yeah, because there's Matthews is getting there too. So it's like Ovechkin could break the record, and then Matthews could break that record too.
You look at the numbers of when Matthews joined the league. He's the pace he's on has been pretty good. The only issue with Matthews over Ovechkin's been able to stay durable. He's been able to stay healthy. Matthews hasn't had that luxury. If I truly believe if Austin Matthews had been healthier, especially earlier in his career, we'd probably be talking about him a lot more one day breaking the record than Ovechkin. But Matthews, that's my only concern, is the health. Ovechkin, that's why he's been able to put himself in this position not just the consistency of scoring all these years, but staying relatively healthy throughout his career.
The same with Sid, you could say, because those two have been like, this is the years they should be underperforming, and they're overperforming.
Mm-hmm. It's incredible when you see what Sidney Crosby did last year, especially when the Penguins are not exactly a great team. And yeah, it's almost like, okay, you got worried that maybe the COVID years would take away the opportunity to see these guys a lot more, right? Ovechkin would, how much it impacted. He'd probably be a lot closer to, he might have already broken it to this point, really, this goals record, if there wasn't the pandemic. But with Crosby, you know, he's another one. Like, we have to also remember there was a time where we thought Sidney Crosby was done with hockey. I don't know if you remember with the concussions, him making that return, and it was such a, we were almost robbed of this player. And so anytime I see these guys, I have such respect for them because they've really ushered in this era. They kept hockey alive in a lot of ways, and I still think they are. It's unfortunate that Crosby's not on a more competitive team with Pittsburgh and Ovechkin. And what I love is that I thought Washington would be bending towards, you know, focusing on his goals record like they did last year, but they're actually so good right now that it's helped him and it's helped elevate him into this position. I think that's really changed this whole spectrum of him going for this record, Gretzky record.
And then at number 2, we have, is Cale Makar the favorite to win the Norris Trophy right now?
Yeah. I think Cale Makar will always get the benefit of the doubt every year. He is just that good of a defenseman. I know we had the one year that Erik Karlsson went over 100 points, but like, how can you not like Cale Makar? He has 15 goals already this year. 15. There are some forwards who are not even close to that number. He's one of my, he's probably my favorite defenseman to watch in the league because he doesn't cheat, right? He's not, I like the most impressive thing about Cale Makar, will always tell me about him being a perennial Norris contender, was when he shut down Connor McDavid in the playoffs the year they went to the Cup final. That was like, you've got, like, in a lot of ways, McDavid is like the Gretzky, Crosby, Lemieux type player, like the best in the league. We finally get that Bobby Orr going against them, right? Like, everyone always would say to me, like, Gretzky is the best player, and I always had a friend of mine tell me, no, Bobby Orr. Everyone underestimates how good Bobby Orr was, right? Like, imagine Bobby Orr playing against some of these guys, right? And so I think that's what we're getting with Cale Makar. We're getting that type of talent playing against the best players. And I don't know where the Avalanche would be right now if it wasn't for Cale Makar, because this has been a tough season for them. They had to rebuild their goaltending on the fly, which you never see a contender do. And they're still they're in a good spot right now where they're in a wildcard spot, but they're also a potential to go up higher in the Central Division. And that's because of Cale Makar. And that's why I think he's the runaway for the North. I know a lot of people say, oh, what about Quinn Hughes? Quinn Hughes will challenge him, but I just don't think Cale Makar gets enough credit for what he does on both ends of the ice. And
definitely. And then, McDavid has his number retired by the Erie Otters, which is good to see.
Yeah, I remember those years with McDavid with the Otters. There's two parts of that. One, obviously, Dylan Strome being there. I had a couple of people I went to high school with that actually got drafted by the Erie Otters. One of them, Adam Pelech, you might know him. He plays for the New York Islanders. I went to high school with him, so it was kind of cool to see him usher in with McDavid, right? And those Erie teams were really good. Another friend of mine, actually, Anthony Cortellessa, he was not thinking about hockey long term. He played a little bit with Erie, but he kind of went towards the different route of he played a few years in the OHL, but he was never really seeing hockey as his future. But yeah, those Erie Otter teams are so good. But like, it was a no brainer. I was like, I didn't know when when Erie would actually do it. It was nice that they did it when he was on the road trip through this part of Canada, so he actually got to be there for it. But it is crazy that we're talking about him getting his number retired, considering he's still playing. He's still an active NHL player. Like, you think of a guy getting his number retired, like, you think this would be something more down the road for him, but I mean, he's just that good that I think Erie felt like, why not give it to him?
Yeah. And then the Jets, Connor Hellebuyck celebrated a 300th career win, which is big for him.
It's huge for goalies, right? Like, this is the reason why the Winnipeg Jets are in the position they're in. Like, there is no, like, to me, the Vezna's his. No one's beating him for the Vezina this year, in my opinion. I know some people put Logan Thompson in there, but I just think Connor Hellebuyck, with the workload that he gets and how much he means to the Jets. I mean, he has 6 shutouts this year. Yeah. Unreal. Like, we talk about the wins, but it's the shutouts too. He's got such great numbers, and he's been like, I criticized the Jets a little bit for the contract that they gave him. They gave him that 8-year deal. I know why they did it. That was the best way to keep him. I thought the Jets were going to look at moving away from Connor Hellebuyck. Not because he wasn't good, but it's because I didn't think he was going to stick around in Winnipeg, because it felt like he was just tired of having to constantly lift the team, and the rest of the, like, it was just like, anybody else going to come and help me, right? That's always been the thing. I think Connor Hellebuyck is that goalie. He is one of those rare, like him and Vasilevsky, Shesterkin are those goalies that can, they're your superstars. You talk about like, no, he's the highest paid player. He is the best player, and he's the most important player, and that's usually why, you know, a team like Winnipeg is able to compete, is because of a guy like Connor Hellebuyck. I think he's just on another level. I'm curious to see. I don't know where his projections potentially are, but I'd like to see him contend for top and goalie wins. He's at, as you said, over 300. Got a little ways to go, but he's on an 8-year deal, so he's committed to playing hockey for the next little bit.
Yeah. And then the Red Wings are looking more and more comfortable under Todd McLellan.
Yeah, I remember the first game under Todd McLellan. It was against the Leafs, and they did not play very well. They got destroyed by the Leafs in that one. But I do think there's good talent on that Detroit team. I know there's areas of the team that are still lacking. I think goaltending is an issue. I think their blue line still needs a little bit of work, but there are some good players on that team. I mean, Patrick Kane has been, you know, a rock star in the NHL, and he's played better last year, obviously coming off hip surgery. It's a little more difficult for him, but you know, they got some good players. I just think that blue line needs some work. They tried to bring in some younger players like a Simon Edvinsson. You know, they got Moritz Seider, who you think would be a Norris Trophy level guy, but hasn't really been there this year for him. I think they really got to work on that blue line before they can really call themselves a playoff contender. But I think Tom McLellan is a good choice. I know some people say, you're recycling a lot of old coaches, but he's a good. You'll figure out what exactly you need when you have a Tom McLellan behind the bench. You know, he's got a lot of success with a lot of different teams. So I think this was the front office saying, we believe this team can compete, maybe not be a cup contender, but maybe they're going to be pushing at least a little bit higher and trying to get himself at least into the playoffs. But it's still a little more work to do. I'm curious to see if Steve Yzerman has some ideas on how to improve this team.
Yeah, and McCollum plays a 1-3-1, and that will show like who is going to defend and who isn't, because it doesn't hide. Like, it'll show when you get beat.
Yeah, no, exactly, right? A coach like him, I remember the day after they got brutally beaten by the Leafs, he pushed those guys in practice the next day. He's not going to let players hide away. He is going to call them out when things aren't going right. So they need that. I think they needed that coach. I don't think Lalonde was a bad coach. I just don't know if he was the right coach for that time for that team. You have to find the right coach for where your team is.
Yeah. And then the Blues and the Ducks celebrated Cam Fowler's 1,000th NHL game, which is nice to see.
It is nice to see. It was surprising that the Blues traded for Fowler in the first place, right? I didn't know if that was where, if any team was even going to try to make a move for Fowler, but he's been a seamless fit for that Blues team, and it was nice because I think there were some Ducks. It was when the Ducks were in town, so a few of the Ducks players got to take a picture and be a part of that ceremony. Like that's that Anaheim team. They're all really close, and so for St. Louis. Again, I like it. I liked what they did bringing him in because it showed that we're not gonna just take a step back. We want to push. We want to push forward, and they're in the hunt for a wild card spot. I think they're one of those teams that could challenge for it. They still need a little more work to do. I think defensively, I think they got some good players. It's just gonna take a little time, and I think Campo, that was a pretty astute trade by Doug Armstrong on top of getting Anaheim to take back salary. So I think Anaheim did the right thing. This is a team that they're not competing with the playoffs just yet, but they're also transitioning a bit. And I feel like they did the right thing in letting Fowler get that opportunity to continue competing.
Yeah, definitely. And he was well deserving of it because even in Anaheim, he gave everything.
Yeah.
So it was well deserving that he got traded to a team that's challenging but not going to be there quite yet.
It's going to take time. It's going to take time for a team. Like when you're going through the draft model where you're going to bottom out, take a bunch of players early. A, you got to get the right players, and B, you got to be patient with these guys. And I think Anaheim, you hope that they don't become the next Buffalo where they take a bunch of good players, but it just doesn't work out. You don't have the right coach in there, and it just spirals to the point where it's just these guys don't get ready. But I do think that trading a guy like Fowler at least allows the rest of the team give those opportunities to the younger players too, right? Because it doesn't make sense to have a Fowler on that team. They're not competing. He wants to compete. And so it was kind of a good move, and it allows other players to get the playing time that they need.
Definitely. Move on to our next one here. Maybe. There we go. So, a little bit about this one, Dave. We've been following these three Kitchener Rangers players because this is their draft year. So we had Mike Farewell on, and he told us a little bit about each of these players. And he said the one to really watch is going to be Cameron Reed. So we've been following these players. I've been updating the slides every week. And so we have Cameron Reed, who's played 42 games, 8 goals, 25 assists for 33 points. We have Luca Romano, who's played 42 games, 16 goals, 17 assists, 33 points. And we had Tanner Lane, who's been 42 games played, 8 goals, and 22 assists for 30 points. So these are our players that we've been watching. And the big one here to watch is going to be Cameron Reed. He's a big defenseman. I think if I remember right, Mike Farewell said he's 6'7".
Okay. Yeah, I mean, look, Cameron. I know actually quite a little bit about Cameron. Yeah, big defenseman. You've seen the steady improvement in his numbers this year offensively, as you said, 33 points this year. He had 23 and 49 last year. 17 years old. He's 6 feet right now, so a little bit of time for him to develop as well. So yeah, a good player over there in Kitchener. Like Kitchener's always been a good hockey town. If you've never been to a game in Kitchener, I suggest you go. It's always a lot of fun.
Awesome. We're going to skip the fantasy hockey and we're going to hop into trades and rumors. So, Lucas Reichel from the Blackhawks is becoming a trade target here, getting closer to the trade deadline.
Yeah, it's interesting. I guess is another one of those players that when you're like a team like Chicago that has taken a lot of players early in drafts, this is a first round pick. Patience goes to a certain point with players, and you get to the point maybe you just say we cut our losses and we just move on and give him another chance. And so with Reichel, it's interesting. I don't know if a team will go for that just yet. I mean, what the problem with right if you're the Blackhawks, you're trading a player at a low, right? In terms
Yeah.
of where he is, and this I'll forget. This young player who's been through how many different coaches in Chicago too, right? Maybe there's areas where he kind of needs to improve. Like I know a lot of things, like a lot of Chicago fans I was reading needs to shoot more. He's a 23-year-old, right? Again, one of those players that had his development impacted by the pandemic. I get that, but at some point you got to show this team why you were a first round pick. Hasn't happened yet. If the Blackhawks do decide to move off from him, it's gonna be tough. I think you're gonna be I think if you're a Blackhawks fan, you're gonna be disappointed what you get in return.
And to me, it could be one of those players that just needed a change of scenery, like when the Rangers traded Capo Caco, who's doing really well over in Seattle right now.
Well, that I think you're kind of right on the ball, right? Where you might need to think about that if you're, well, I mean, if you're Chicago, sometimes you got to just say, all right, we got a Connor Bedard right now. We cannot allow his years to get wasted because other players aren't pulling their weight. So if you got to decide to make a move like that, you can't get too bogged down with what you get back in return.
Okay. And then the next one is the Bruins have two people on the trade block is Trent Frederick and Justin Brazeau.
Yeah, Justin Brazeau, former Leaf. Well, I wouldn't call him a Leaf prospect because he was signed with the Marlies, but one of those players I think the Leafs maybe let go a little early, but credit to the Bruins, they found him for nothing and turned into a middle six player for them. Big player, has a pretty decent shot. I think a team would definitely call if Justin Brazeau was on the block, more so if they want to add some depth scoring and a bigger body to their lineup. Same with Trent Frederick. Like he's a guy that, again, teams that are looking to bolster the bottom six, he's the type of player you want to bring in. Brings the physicality. He's got some playoff experience over there with Boston. Yeah, and you're not dealing for players who have high ceilings. No, Frederick almost got 20 goals last year, but he's purely a fourth line guy if you're a contending team, right? You got to think about if you're Boston, you're trading Frederick to a team that's upgrading one specific part, right? You can't be like, this guy can maybe be your third line center. He's most likely going to be our fourth line center. If a team does view him as a third line center, if you're Boston, you try to work with that team for a trade. But I think most teams are going to be like, to bring the price down, they're going to be like, we see this guy more as a fourth liner, so we're going to give you a fourth line price.
Yeah, and I think Trent Frederick would be a great fit for any playoff team that's going to be contending.
Absolutely.
And then we'll go into the next one, which is probably the biggest name out there is Scott Lofton from the Flyers.
Yeah, he's a guy that Leafs fans were bringing up as a potential target. Problem here is the Flyers they view him so highly. He like I heard one person say that it was almost like you're trading a Sidney Crosby out of Philly. Part of the reason is he's still signed for another year with a $3 million cap hit. But I mean, look, on a Leafs team, he's a third line center. On a lot of teams, most likely a third line center, but I guarantee the Flyers will say, no, I think we this guy can be a second line center for a team. I don't see it. I think, again, it's one of those where he's got a lot of value as an experienced guy, but how much are you going to pay for that?
Then same thing on the Flyers. We got Rasmus Ristolainen too, who is out there as well.
Yeah, I mean, he was named to, I think he was named Team Finland for the for the Four Nations. I just thought his career was going on a different trajectory. I thought he was going kind of down a bit, but he's really put himself in a really good position in Philly to improve his game. I think John Tortorella had a lot to do with that. And again, if you have the cap space to add a Rasmus Ristolainen and you need the size, definitely go for it. Again, this is one of those things where if the Flyers believe they're not contending this year, trade them. See what you can get for these guys, because you can't be hogged down on keeping so many of these veterans, because eventually it's another year you're adding, right? Take advantage of if another team really wants them. Again, you also have to consider where you're trading them to. Most likely not going to be within your own division. Most likely not. But yeah, I just think some teams tend to hold on to these guys, and I view it as a mistake. If you can find a way to get maybe some younger pieces or get some of that money off your books, I think that's more value to it.
Then we got Rickard Rakell. The Penguins are looking to move on from him.
He's it's been up and down for Rakell ever since he was traded to Pittsburgh from Anaheim, but he's got 23 goals this year, and he's a very versatile player. If you need him to play center, he can play a little bit of center. If you just need a guy to score on the wing, he can do that too. He plays a lot of minutes. He's clearly a top six forward here. More so for me, I just wonder, can he fit? He has to go to the right team. I think when he was with Anaheim, I wanted the Leafs to trade for this guy. I thought he would have been a perfect addition because he could play center, he could play wing. The Leafs really needed somebody who could do that. But the issue is he's up there in age, right? 31, not terribly old, but this is a player who's got a lot of miles on him. He's always played a lot in his career, and you just hope that the offense can match come playoff time. He's got a good resume for when he was with Anaheim in the playoffs, but he wasn't a big playoff performer. There was one year where he had almost a point per game in the playoffs. I just think that he's got to have the right coach in the right situation to have success. So it'll be an interesting trade for the Penguins to try. I don't see the value in the Pittsburgh Penguins keeping him unless they think they're in the wild card hunt, but they've made some bad moves, and I just don't know if you want to overdo it if you're Pittsburgh and trying to hold on to maybe to too many guys that just don't make sense to move forward with.
Then our last one is the Oilers are linked to the Ducks Gibson, but I think that's with every goalie. Edmonton's going to be linked to them.
Yeah, I mean, Stuart Skinner, that's always a tough one because he's had an up and down year. Right now he's on a good stretch. The Oilers are doing pretty good. So you got to be careful when you're going for a player like that. Like John Gibson he's not a backup. I know some people say, oh, he can come and be a backup. He's not a backup goalie. So if you're trading for John Gibson, this is a 1A, 1B situation. And I do know that Anaheim or some other team is going to have to take salary back because the Oilers just don't have any cap space right now to make a deal like this. And yeah, I've been hearing Gibson's name with the Oilers forever. He's also got to waive his no trade clause to play there. I think it's a modified, so it's a 10-team no trade list. I mean, I don't know why you wouldn't, but you should have the Oilers as a destination because they're a team that's going to compete as long as they have Connor McDavid doing what he's doing. But yeah, they definitely need goaltending help. It's just, can they make the cost? They can have Anaheim take some money and have another team take some money because that's not a commitment for 1 year. That's 2 more years after this year at $6.4 million for a cap. Like that's starting goaltender money, and we know he's not a starting goaltender anymore, in my opinion, unless he goes on this late resurgence. I don't personally see it, but I mean, crazier things have happened with goalies. I just remember when he first came into the league with Anaheim, I thought this guy was going to be a star. He had some really good numbers. It was him. It was Frederick Anderson, kind of doing a 1A, 1B situation. But, I mean, Anaheim's also just hasn't been very good. They've made some crucial mistakes with what they've done, but trading Gibson wouldn't be one of them. I think they feel very good with their goaltending depth right now. They like Lucas Dostal that much that I think he's got a good future ahead of him. And I just don't know if it's fair to John Gibson to keep him around, especially on a team that's not competing. And Anaheim's got a lot of goalies in the system, so I don't know if it's I don't foresee a long-term future with Gibson in Anaheim.
Another team I thought might be in on Gibson, which could help them out, would be the Red Wings, because they have a lot of assets that they could trade to Anaheim too.
Yeah, I don't hate that as a destination. I think Detroit really needs goaltending help. They need stable goaltending. Like they're relying on Alex Line right now. That's not going to work. Now, if I were Detroit, I would say, can you take Billy Husso's contract off our books, and we'll take Gibson. So I think that could work. Funny enough, Lucas Reichel scored tonight as we're talking, so he must have heard us and decided he's got to play better to get some get his trade value up.
Yeah,
it's actually a nice goal too. Just seeing on the left of my screen here, but
nice.
I think Gibson. I think any trade involving Gibson, I could see it coming from an Eastern Conference team. Detroit makes sense. Philly definitely needs a goalie moving forward, so they could be in the running. Carolina, I've heard Carolina's name because Frederick Anderson. You can't rely on him to be healthy. Can Kochetkov be enough for them come playoff time? Hasn't really worked out. So having a veteran like Gibson to be that 1A, 1B situation, I think works for Carolina pretty well. It's a lot of teams in the Metro, I think, are more goalie needy right now than I think other divisions. And I also got to think of where he would put teams he would put on his no trade list. Like, he's going to want to go to a team that's in a better contending position. So he's probably going to put a lot of the teams that aren't, that are more the bottom of the standings on his no team trade list. In my opinion, to keep himself in a position to go somewhere where he has a chance to win.
Awesome. So now we go on to my favorite part, and that's the guest spotlight. So got a few questions for you, David. The first one is, how did you get started?
How did I get started? Well, it all started when I was in high school. I knew I wanted to get into sports media. Like, this was my life was sports. Like, I watch a lot of sports. I like talking about sports, like annoying people about sports. So it started literally. Someone I know said, "Hey, if you're looking to do some Leaf blogs, come and let me know." So I kind of got my seeing what it was like to do some writing and get into that. Foray. Then I said, well, I really want to make this a career. So I went to school. I went to Centennial, and for anyone in Canada and Ontario, there's the Centennial Sports Journalism Program, a great program for anyone that wants to break into the industry. It's a tough program, but what that did was it led to two things. It led to my internship at Sportsnet. I've been there ever since I did my internship in end of 2017. So basically since 2018, I've been at Sportsnet there. And then it also led me to meet a guy named, you might know him as Al's brother, but I know him as Mike DeStefano. It's always funny when everyone's like, do you do a podcast with Al's brother? Yes. Mike one day asked, hey, you want to be a guest on my Leaf show? I did it a couple of times, and just kind of, I guess he had been thinking about it, but out of the blue, he's like, would you want to be a permanent co-host with me on this show? And at the time, I was trying to figure out a way to really break myself into doing more Leaf stuff, because that's my I grew up as a Leafs fan. You can see the Leafs are kind of my life. What you don't see is what I got in my room in terms of old nostalgia Leaf stuff. For anybody that's a Leafs fan, I got a hat signed from James Reimer. I met him, like the nicest individual I'd ever met was James Reimer. when I did the blog, I interviewed James Van Riemsdyk after doing a grueling workout with him. So I paid for that autograph with my body. Yeah, so he asked me to join, and I had to think about it at first and make sure that it was going to be okay with my sports network and make that work, because it's when I'm putting it's a podcast we do 5 days a week, right?
Yeah.
So I joined this network. It's the Locked On Podcast Network. They've got a lot. All the NHL teams have hosts. It's become a really big network in terms of bringing that local coverage that's been taken away from a lot of media companies cutting local sports coverage. So we've become kind of the go-to in a lot of ways. And so in Toronto, it's been tough because we have a lot more competition. But in other markets like Ottawa, it's in some ways that show gets a lot of it more attention sometimes than their own local radio shows, which I find crazy. Like, those guys have built such a great community in Ottawa. So that's kind of what I liked about it, is that it's still, it's not considered totally fan related, right? So it allowed me to connect more with Leafs fans. We have a good Discord group right now that we talk. Actually, they're buzzing. I can feel my phone buzzing from the Leafs game that's going on. But hey, we're always looking, and the great thing about this network is people have really, if they've got a team that they cheer for, there's a spot usually for people that want to join in on this network, right? Like, we've had people take over for Edmonton. We've had like that. I was so surprised, this team that went to the Stanley Cup final, and I can't remember when we eventually got our host there, but eventually we found a host there, and it's like, how do you not want to talk about the Oilers? The Jets were another team, right? So a lot of our Canadian teams, we've had a bit of switching around with hosts, although our show, I say Locked On Canadians and Senators, have been pretty stable in terms of our hosts for the last little bit. But yeah, any team you're thinking of, go and check it out. We've got all the NHL teams pretty much covered. We got MLB, NFL, NCAA even. Like, it's crazy how big this network really is. And so I know a lot of people probably seen some of the hosts on this show. That's kind of where when you mentioned, and I talked to a few guys, they're like, yeah, Dan's great. And so this forum is great, right? It allows us to do the talks that we want to do without having somebody tell us, no, you can't talk about that. That doesn't happen. And that's why I like this network.
Yeah, no, we've had Seth on from Locked On Wild. We had Kyle from Locked On Avalanche. We've had Gil from Islanders. They've all been, like, I can never say anything bad about you guys, because you guys have been wonderful and great. And every answer I get is, I love coming on because I don't get to host. I get to be on the other side.
No, absolutely. And that's the other thing too. Like, I like coming on these shows because, I had to, Mike generally I call it drive the bus. He puts the show in its right place. And once in a while I host, but I always love being challenged, right? Too. And coming on these different shows and talking about maybe things I don't always talk about.
Awesome. So the next question is probably the hardest question I've given to every guest, and that is, what is your Mount Rushmore of either new or older players for the Leafs or even for the NHL?
Yeah, so we're talking about Rushmore. We're looking at about what, four guys.
Four.
Oh, this is always so tough. The Leafs, it's funny because the Leafs, considering their history, you can go through so many different generations, and every generation means something different to every Leafs fan. But one player has to be on every Mount Rushmore. I don't care what you say. Matt Sundin. If he's not on your Mount Rushmore for Leafs, you're a hater. I always say that. So you have to do Matt Sundin. If I had to pick a player from this current era, because that's what I like to do. I like to, yes, I know Mount Rushmore's talk about people from the past, but I think right now Austin Matthews, when you're talking about great Leafs, he's going to put himself in that. He's putting himself in that conversation. But I think there's no doubt he's going to be there. and I always bring up this player from the past because he was such a great Leaf, and he always he lost a little bit of luster because of things that happened with the ownership group and things like that. But Dave Keon, not a player that not a lot of people talk about when it comes to greatest Leafs of all time. But if you talk to a lot of people who cover or watch the Leafs, especially in their cup times, Dave Keon was that player for them. And then finally, this is a tough one because the thing is that there's a theme here: 3 forwards, and it's like, do I go with a 4th forward? I'm gonna probably leave somebody off the list, and somebody's going to get very angry with me. And so that's why I can't put a goalie here yet, because I don't know if there's any goalie really in like that when I think of look, no disrespect to Johnny Bauer, God rest his soul, great goalie. Right, Turk Broda, really good goalie. I grew up with Curtis Joseph. He was my favorite goalie growing up. But how can you leave Daryl Sittler off the list? Like, the Leafs don't have many. They have decent records, but the one that always sticks out, growing up, I had all these books about Leafs history, things they've done. Everyone talks about the 10-point night with Daryl Sittler, right? First player in Leafs history to have 100 points in a season. Also during a time where they went through a little bit of a dictatorship ownership, right, with Harold Ballard, and he was still a great player. One of those guys I felt like, you talk about Mattson maybe not winning a cup, Daryl Sittler is also on that list for me because he was such a good player during those Leafs years, and reason why I put him on this list too, he does so much work right now in these Leafs during Leafs community things. He's always there, and he's always very positive. And I remember when the Leafs retired jerseys, because remember for the longest time they honored jerseys, they never retired the numbers.
Yeah.
When he got his number retired, he was so emotional because it meant so much to him, and I think it meant so much to people who watched him play, because a lot of things did not go right for Daryl Sittler in the clashes he had with ownership, but he was such a great player that it was just hard it was hard, I think, maybe for him to see another player wear his jersey, and like he didn't mind it, but I could tell he minded it because he meant like he was the top guy for the organization for the longest time, and to not get it properly rewarded or recognized for it, that's why I'm putting him on my Mount Rushmore.
Awesome. That's a great one. Those are some great players on that too.
Yeah,
especially Sundin.
Yeah, Sundin. We were so spoiled watching Matt Sundin play. Like, I know he didn't always put up a bunch of points. He was such a good player. One of the best players break on one-on-one breakaway situations. He made it look so easy, and he beat some good goalies. I remember one time he got Henrik Lundqvist bad. Henrik Lundqvist had no idea what was coming out, and it was his fellow countryman. So yeah, I'm a big Matt Sundin guy. Always have been.
All right, next question is, who's your favorite Leafs player of old or new?
Favorite Leafs player, old or new? I got to go with Cujo. I had this naive dream growing up, even though I didn't know how to skate, that I could be I wanted to be Curtis Joseph. We would do art projects in school. I was drawing Curtis Joseph goalie masks. It was the mask. It was the ridiculous saves he would make. He also represented the most competitive times in my Leafs history, mine growing up when they went on those playoff runs, right? Him, Sundin, Gary Roberts, Alex McGillney, Brian McCabe, like that era of Leafs always resides with me. And Cujo was right in the middle of it. I cried. I was in grade. So I would have been about 7 or 8 years old when he left to go to Detroit. When the Leafs didn't sign him, he had that again, I was naive. I had no idea he had the feud with Pat Quinn over what happened with Team Canada and how that salted the relationship. But I cried when he signed in Detroit. I was so upset. My dad had to explain to me the whole idea of players leaving and things like that. And in a way, kind of told me I had to get over it. Not easy. But man, like, a player is your favorite player when he's gone, and it hurts you. It hurts. That's true. The true idea of fandom, in my opinion.
I can attest to that because I'm a huge Brian Leach player. So seeing him go from New York to Boston to Toronto, it really hurt. All I ever known was him in the New York Rangers uniform.
Do you I remember I went to a Leafs game, and I had my uncle got tickets in a private box with his company, and I didn't know who Brian Leach was. Didn't know. I was a kid, and I said, "Who's this new guy?" And one of my uncle's friends was like, "Kid, you have no idea, but this guy right here, Brian Leach, one of the greatest defensemen, American defensemen of all time." And I eventually learned who Brian Leach was and what he did with the Rangers, and I'm like, "Wow, Rangers let him go." More surprised about that than anything else.
Yeah, no, he is my hands down favorite player. He was who I wanted to be when I grew up.
You know what? Not a bad player to try to mimic your life off of. That's for sure.
Worst part is I couldn't play defense because I was a forward. I just couldn't skate backwards.
Well, a lot of people would say you're Morgan Riley then.
Yeah. All right. Next question for you is thoughts on the team this year.
You know what? I didn't know what to think of how they were going to gel and mesh with Craig Berube as the head coach. I was worried that you're bringing an old school coach on players that, it's almost like when you bring a John Tortorella to any team, or you bring a Daryl Sutter, right, to one of those teams that has a lot of skill. Can they play the right way under him? Was it going to work? I think it's worked to a degree. I think there's been growing pains, and I think he's trying to get this team to play the right way. I like their blue line a lot more. I know a lot of people are not high on Morgan Riley right now. I think Riley's got to settle into his game a bit more, and I think Craig Berube is trying to get Morgan Riley to play the right way, and it's tough when a lot, you get pulled from your normal duties on the power play and things like that. But I really do think that if they stick with what Craig Berube is teaching them, and if they get this power play going, this is a team that I think can push this year. The Eastern Conference is not as good as it has been in the past. Washington, yes, a good team. Florida, still a good team. But the Leafs are, like, in my opinion, they're up there, top 3 team in this Eastern Conference. There are a lot of teams that, aren't having as good of years right now.
And my Rangers won.
Rangers, one of them. The Devils have played better, yes, but Tampa has had some ups and downs. Boston, right? We're used to seeing Boston and Toronto round 1. I don't think that's happening this year. I don't even know if Boston makes the playoffs, right? And so I think this is a good opportunity for the Leafs if they just buy into what Berube is selling and start playing the way they need to. I think they can do it. It's just, can they? And they might have to make a trade or two to help a little bit with it. But I think this team has. I just want to see more than one round, right? Win the first round, get to that second round, and understand it gets harder. The stars, but it's going to be the stars that push this team. A lot of people will talk about certain like, they got to go get this guy and that guy. When the star players are leading the charge, that's when this team, nobody can beat them. But that hasn't happened, and Craig Berube has to push the right buttons to get these star players going.
Next question for you is, what is your favorite NHL or Leafs moment?
Favorite NHL? Well, I guess it should be when the Leafs beat the Lightning, but that's not it for me. I remember it was in the playoffs. It was going to, like, it was the only time my parents let me stay up late past my bedtime. The Leafs were in the playoffs, and it was going like second overtime. And I think it was Gary Roberts had won it, or Steve Thomas had won it overtime. Can't remember who scored it. But I just remember I was so excited. And then, unfortunately, Leafs didn't go on much longer after that. I think they were bounced after the second or third round. But, like, that to me, right, it was like that team would always have those playoff excitements. And so that's what I remember most growing up with those Leafs teams. I think it was probably that overtime. I think it was against Ottawa, too. And they beat them in, like, second overtime, and it was just well worth staying up late for.
All right, my last question for you before we let you go, and that is, will the Leafs add at the deadline, and what do you think they will add?
I will say yes to that. I just think you're a team that's going to be adding every year as long as you have Matthews, Marner, Nylander, all these guys pushing. As long as Leafs are in the playoff hunt, they're going to add. I think they're going to add a third line center. Brad Treliving has already kind of said he knows what the team needs, but it's just finding the right trade partner to do it. So I think they're going to add a center. I think they're going to add a defenseman. I think last year they didn't just add one thing; they went and added multiple things. But they need to improve their scoring. They need to find more offense, especially low in the lineup. So I think they're going to add a third line center, and I think they're going to try to add a defenseman, one that potentially could play with Morgan Rielly. So I think that's something that they need.
Awesome. I'd like to thank you for your time tonight, David. I really do appreciate it. I'm glad we got this opportunity to talk and to learn a little bit more about the Leafs prospects and hear your thoughts on it and everything like that. And I have David's link in the description, so you guys can go over to Locked On Leafs, sub them up, give them a like, and check out their content. It's great stuff over there. As he said, he's on there with Al's brother, for some of you who know him from TSN, and he's a big card guy too. Before we go, do you have any other hobbies?
You know, it's funny. Music is mine. I'm a big music guy. I used to grow up collect hockey cards a lot. I just don't know if I can. I'm on the same level as. I hear Mike talk about cards, and it's just my brain goes, whoa! Just the way that has changed since I grew up, right? The different levels of different tiers of cards and the packs and things like that. It's become an expensive hobby too. So, yeah, music is mine. Music has always been my second. That's my getaway from sports hobby, because I think everyone needs one of those. If you're anyone that's in sports, find a hobby outside of sports. Otherwise, you're going to drive yourself nuts. So I would say music is my other hobby, but I do appreciate the hustle you guys do with your hockey card collecting, I will say.
Awesome. As it is a custom on the show, I don't know if the other Locked On fellas told you, but we let you guys close out the show as if you would be closing out your own show.
All right. Well, we are here on Hockey Stick Talk Nation. So make sure you go and subscribe wherever you get your shows from. Make sure you go to the YouTube page and subscribe. Make sure you follow Dan wherever he has his social media on. You can follow the Locked On These podcasts on YouTube as well. We're always looking for subscribers there. And make sure you come and listen to the next show. I don't know who your next guest is, but make sure you subscribe so you get the notification what that next guest is. But until then, keep it locked right here on Hockey Stick Talk Nation.
Thanks. Have a great night, everyone, and we'll see you on the next one.